This is the Thursday, October 11th, 2012 meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Will you call the roll, please?
Timothy Big, Dean Cars,
Here.
Jeff Ron,
Here.
Joshua Fink, Ann Denny,
Here.
Kate Williams,
Here.
Dale Patrick,
Here.
John Dunham,
Here.
Deanna Willard.
Here.
We have no minutes for approval this evening. Our next agenda item, special order of business, executive session disclosures. Are there any disclosures this evening? Mr. Patrick.
Yeah, I was not here for the September 13th meeting, so I will not be voting on the agenda.
On the consent agenda items?
Yes.
Those are the resolutions for approval. Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Is there anyone else with any disclosures this evening? Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams.
Yes, I also was not at the September 13th board meeting, so I will not be voting on the resolutions for approval on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Are there any other disclosures this evening? Seeing none, based on those disclosures, we will have 5 members of the board that can vote on the consent agenda item. For those in attendance this evening, in order to pass a motion, requires a majority of the fully constituted board. Fully constituted board consists of 9 members, so 5 board members must vote in favor of a motion. We will have a quorum, so we can act on the resolutions this evening. With that in mind, we have before us the consent agenda as agenda item D. 1, resolutions for approval. We have 3 resolutions for approval. Resolution 2012-026, excuse me, 2012-026, 2012-027, and 2012-028. Is there any, Mr. Dunham? Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Ms. Denny, you've seconded that motion?
Yes, I have.
Thank you, Mr. Denny. Is there any objection to approval of the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda items are approved. We have no appearance request, unfinished business, or regular agenda items this evening. That brings us to our first case. Prior to us discussing the sufficiency of notice, I will read the order of business for variance hearings. The chair shall introduce the variance and explain the procedure to be followed. The variance, case number, and the name of the applicant shall be read into the record. The board shall hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of notice. The board shall hear a brief staff presentation outlining the variance, not to exceed 10 minutes. On conclusion of the staff presentation, the board members and the applicant may then direct questions to the staff through the chair. The applicant shall give his or her presentation, not to exceed 10 minutes. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of the evidence that the variance should be granted. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and the staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The hearing shall then be open for public testimony. Each person has 3 minutes. Representatives of groups have 5 minutes. All persons who testify may be questioned by the board, staff, or the applicant. On conclusion of the public testimony, the staff, followed by the applicant, shall have the right of rebuttal. The board shall proceed to develop oral findings and conclusions with regard to the variance and disposition of the variance. The staff shall reduce the oral findings and conclusions to writing for subsequent adoption by the board at a later meeting. The matter then rests with the board, and the chair asks for the positive motion from the board. Our first case this evening is case 2012-119. The petitioner is Larry Koch. Is the petitioner here this evening?
Yes.
Thank you. He's indicated he is present. If you'll have a seat, we'll have the staff presentation. Could staff provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 79 public hearing notices were mailed. No public comments were received. Also, no response was received from the Eagle River Community Council.
Thank you. Would you proceed with your presentation?
Thank you. Larry Koch, the owner of Wood River Apartments, LLC, requests a parking reduction of 25 spaces. The parking requirement for the site is 131 spaces, and currently there are only 106 spaces provided. The petitioner has provided a parking study that shows only about 80 parking spaces are filled when the apartment complex has no vacancies, is 100% filled. The traffic department has reviewed the parking analysis and has no objection to granting the parking reduction requested by the petitioner. The standard is met for standard number 1 and also standard number 2. If assumptions about parking demand are incorrect, then there is sufficient space to accommodate additional parking on site. Therefore, the department recommends approval of the parking variance subject to conditions 1 and 2 on page 4 of the packet. I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any questions of staff by a board member? Mr. Ron.
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. McLaughlin, I have a question on page 39 of the staff packet. There's a letter from the Development Services Division which references proposal to remove the low-income element and construct the 24 spaces. Can you speak to the status of that, or should I reserve my question for the petitioner?
I thank you for the question through the chair, Mr. Ron. I think I can speak to it. So my understanding is that Mr. Koch is refinancing the property or doing something having to do with the bank, and he was asked to provide a letter to the lender from the Land Use Review Division, which used to be part of planning, but now they're not. Anyway, these guys do sort of parking determinations and that, and they reviewed the site and found it to be in compliance with the zoning code and building permits, with the exception of the parking. The reviewer, Irma Cox, did an extraordinary amount of research and discovered that the site was approved for a parking variance in the 80s and was built, according to that parking variance. But one of the conditions of the parking variance was that 50% of the units in this apartment complex would be filled by it was either senior housing or low-income or affordable housing, something like that. And Mr. Koch doesn't, there have been successive owners, and although many of the units are occupied by such a clientele or such tenants, he doesn't keep track of that, and that's not a criteria. He's not running an affordable housing development, so it doesn't meet that condition of approval of the parking variance. And so, hence, he's before us now, or before the board now, asking for the parking reduction, essentially the same as what was approved, back then.
If I could, Mr. Chair, follow up. My interest, Mr. McLaughlin, is actually in the second half of that statement about constructing the 24 spaces. And again, I can ask the petitioner there, but as I interpret that statement, there's perhaps a proposal on the table to construct some parking spaces.
So should the proposed nature of the dwelling units change from development such as low-income housing to other market value? This is quoting the condition. Should there be a demonstration of parking problems, the required 24 spaces should then be mandatory. So the parking variance, which the resolution of approval is on page 42 of your packet. approving the original parking variance, that's quoting the condition that said that if there was a parking problem after this apartment building is built, then they should provide the parking, or if the low-income housing goes away, then they should build the parking. And the petitioner, Mr. Cook, can build the parking on site. He has a plan to do it. It's just that he went and spoke with the paver, and it would cost him a lot of money. And he'd prefer to go this route and get approved for the variance rather than take out part of the yard. And it's an area where I think there's some play equipment for children in that. He'd rather not go through the expense of paving the parking. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions of staff? Mr. Ron, you're back on the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get it out of the way quickly and then be quiet for a while. Mr. McLaughlin, through the chair, question on page 25 of the staff packet. There's a statement from staff in a report, land use review comment, short plat, stating the variance should be amended to include a reduction in parking of 32 parking spaces. Can you speak to that as to whether or not you considered that comment in development of your department recommendations and the phrasing of the variance request as well?
So thank you for the question through the chair, Mr. Ron. Jillian Inglis, someone else in Irma Cox's office, wrote this review, and she came up with slightly different numbers. So after she provided these comments, I went and spoke with her, and she was comfortable with the way that the report the way that I've written the report and the parking reduction there. It had to do with rounding of numbers, and she was looking at the historical, what was originally approved, and the building is slightly different than what it was originally approved for. That was taken into account with the original approval, which gave a 20% parking reduction, but was slightly, so the configuration of how the site was built, as you can see on page 5 of the packet, is slightly different than the configuration of the way it was requested in the variance on page 44 of your packet. They just sort of took advantage of some of the empty space in the site to, I think that they were trying to orient the building so that the parking lot opened up into the open space area rather than have it be behind buildings and sort of hidden. That's just a theory of mine. But yeah, there's just this history, and the numbers got all sort of weird, and that was her best snapshot at it. And she said that a 25 space reduction from 131 spaces down to 106 was fine.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Mr. McLaughlin, so I guess this is a follow-up to Mr. Ron's first question, but for my own benefit, we have the verbiage from the previous resolution talking about requiring the 24 parking spaces if the nature of the development changed. However, there's nothing in our staff packet indicating parking has been a problem historically on the site from land use. This isn't before us as a result of a complaint that's been filed. Anything along those lines, is there?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, this was discovered by Land Use Review when they were doing a zoning letter determination for the lender at the request of Mr. Cook.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? Seeing none, could the petitioner come forward, please? And could you state and spell your name for the record?
Larry Cook, Larrykoch.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you. I purchased this property in 2001 through a native corporation. They were, I believe, the third owners of the property since it was built in 1986. When I bought it, First National Bank was my lender. The property had a full MAI appraisal, full property inspection, phase 1 environmental, full title search, all the normal requirements done for a large apartment complex. This spring, for a variety of reasons, I decided to refinance the building again and went with an outside lender. He had his own appraiser come up, and in March of this year called me and asked me if I was aware of any parking situations, and I said no, none at all. And he said that he had located the variance from 1986 that is the item here. And I was in Arizona spending some time, and with the snows that we had, I knew that there was going to be no way I was going to be able to clear off the area where this proposed parking was going to be expanded. So I contacted the parking authorities and spent time over the phone with Irma Cox and some of her staff, and that is how the letter was dated March 12th came about. I needed it to close the loan. The lender needed to see that indeed the variance had a they were not going to lend on the building with a open variance, and I didn't know a thing about it. I had never seen the variance before. So that's how the page 39, that letter from the municipality of Anchorage came about. They agreed that they would give me until 2013 to comply with the variance. When I got back to Anchorage in early summer, I went to the parking authority, the planning department, and I just knew we had never had any parking issues there, and decided to go ahead and follow the regulations and the steps to appeal the variance. So I went ahead and spoke with the staff and completed a parking analysis. I took all the leases that I could find for the last 6 years. By law, we have to keep them for 24 months, so some of them we had already been tossed out, but most of the leases I still had on site, and reviewed the parking needs. Part of the lease package that we have requires tenants to complete separate forms regarding their vehicles, so we have license numbers, a number of cars owned, and so forth. So I reviewed all those leases and came up with the analysis that's part of the package that showed that, and I used August because August is a month that historically we're 100% occupied. We're just 100% full in the summertime. So I took August of each year from 2007 through 2012, and then the number of cars registered and the number of leases that I found, and then just did a complete average per building. Some of the buildings, there's 7 buildings on site. Some of them are all 3-bedroom units. Some are 1s and 2s, and came up with about 79 cars that are owned and on site at during August anyway, which is our, like I say, a month of 100% occupancy. This last August, the analysis showed, I think, 75 cars. So we always have a number of people who don't own cars just because of the location of the property. in the center of Eagle River. But anyway, and then we do have about a 10,000 square foot playground area that's at the far west end of the site, and that's shown on the survey. And that is available if it would ever be necessary for any type of overflow. And that's shown on page 5 on the survey that was done in August. And then there's a photograph of that space on page 19. Not a very good one, by the way, but a photograph. And it's basically just a playground area for the kids. We have 32 three-bedroom apartments, and there's a number of kids there, of course. So I believe the analysis showed that there really isn't a necessity for more parking. It would just be more blacktop out there, and it would just increase the number of vacant spaces that are seldom used or ever used. We do have 106 spaces there now. And that includes 2 office spaces, which are not occupied during the evening, and I think we have adequate parking already. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Are there any questions of the board? By the board of the applicant? Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cook, the 63 assigned spaces with plugins that you indicate, are those marked in any way to indicate them as tenant
Yes,
parking
yeah,
only?
each one is individually marked with a plug-in. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Dunham.
Yes, Mr. Cook, on page 26 of the board packet, the reviewer indicated that they would like to see a new parking and landscape plan if this variance is approved. Do you have a problem with that condition? I mean, basically, I think what they're looking for is what you have out there.
No, I don't think that would be an issue. I'm not sure what it requires me to do. The site is fully landscaped. I'm not sure how similar it is today as to when it was completed.
I guess one of the things when I was reading this, and I'm just going to give you kind of my view of it, it looked like there was a requirement for a landscape plan and a parking plan in the original variance. Doesn't look like they ever saw anything like that, or they couldn't track it down, and that's how the reviewer is tracking the compliance. So that's my guess.
Is that something the surveyor could do then, I guess?
I don't know if he could do the landscape plan. He could
Okay.
certainly tell you where your parking spaces are.
I can determine on how to get a landscaping plan. It's all landscape, so that's not an issue in terms of it.
I figured by now, even if you had just random trees popping up, that it would probably be covered pretty good.
Well, we have one fewer tree from 3 weeks ago, but yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
then you did better than I did.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. McLaughlin.
Through the chair, Mr. Dunham, a couple weeks ago, I remember sitting with Irma Cox discussing this case maybe 3 weeks ago, and she had in her thick stack of research on this property an approved landscape, a letter stating that the landscape plan had been accepted and approved by the building review department, land use review, for a land use permit in compliance with the building permits. And so at the time that this was the site was developed, they did have an approved landscape plan, and I think maybe that wasn't communicated to Jillian Inglis with this letter, her comments. That's all. Thank you.
So you were able to verify that everything is as it was? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I apologize. It was approved, the landscape plan, and
And you verified?
it was verified, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunham, just, I guess, a question on those statements you read on page 26. I see it reading, if the board denies the variance and parking is required, a new parking and landscaping plan should be
Okay.
submitted. Am I?
That's a good point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the applicant by the board? Does staff have any questions of the applicant?
No, I do not.
If not,
Thank you.
Mr. Cook. If you'll have a seat, we will open it up for public hearing. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify? If you could please come forward and state your name for the record. State and spell your name.
My name is Tim Eben. That's T-I-M. Last name Eben, E-B-B-E-N.
Thank you, Mr. Eben. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Not sure where to begin because I didn't know there was that 38-page packet available for review. I'm a business owner right across the street on the backside of this proposed area, which is Alcross Subdivision, Block 2, Lot 11 and 12. I also live on lots 6, 7, and 8. I'm not sure. First, my goal here is not to say that Mr. Cook needs to build more parking spots. That's not my goal. My goal, though, is to tell you what we see on our side of the fence and what happens from time to time. And I'm surprised that the police reports weren't found or data, is many of the kids that live in that area, and I say kids as young adults that are in high school, park in the Quick Lube parking lot, or they park all along Brooks Loop, which is the back side of some of the buildings, and it's easy access. The other time that we see parking in that area is when people appear to be moving out or wanting to get into the back side of their building there because there's no fence that divides the road from the backyards of those buildings. So I don't know what's causing that, if it's because of lack of parking. I can't speak to that. Or if it's just sheer convenience that it's closer than what the parking spot that they can get to is. But it's frustrating because some of the kids that come through there tease the dogs. I own a canine daycare as they're passing through there. They actually had to put in no parking signs along there because they finally reinstalled the bike path. So there's a whole lot of issues on Brooks Loop that are probably not related to the amount of parking spaces. Like I said, I can't say. All I know is there's a lot of issues between Quick Lube parking lot and mine. Does that make sense?
Mr. Eben, could you explain where's the Quick Lube parking lot relative to what street is it located on?
You can have this package. I'll get one.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I think you're down here, right?
Yeah. Will this show up on here?
They have that
It
package.
sure will if you'll let us turn it on.
Yeah.
And while you're setting that up, Mr. Eben, and I probably should have spoke at the start of the meeting, but there's staff packets at the front foyer when you
sorry,
walk
I'm
in.
not good at this, and I apologize.
That's quite all right. I
Okay.
apologize for not letting you know that.
So my business is at this spot right here and right here.
Okay.
Okay. This road here is Brooks Loop, and it goes around this way. Pizza Man, if you're familiar with it, is in this area.
Yep.
Quick Lube is here. There's a little footpath that goes right here.
Yep.
And I don't know if closing that off is a good idea, because I know there's several people that probably work at Pizza Man that cut through there, and my goal isn't to make their life inconvenient. I sat there and I think, maybe I shouldn't be here because I'm going to probably frustrate a lot of Eagle Riverites, and I don't want to cost Mr. Cook some money. That isn't my goal. What happens, though, is we have a bike path there that's used by a lot of young kids, people with dogs, joggers, what have you, and it's the only one-way street in Eagle River. And my real problem is over by Pizza Man, and just as a sidebar, people are going the wrong way out that street all the time. And it complicates it when people are parked illegally there. So, again, I just need to introduce some stuff there and the problems we have with that road, and I don't know if it's caused by the lack of parking or just the convenience of how that is compared to the available parking that's in the place that is in question.
Thank you, Mr. Evan. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Dunham?
I don't have any questions of staff, but I'd like to
Oh, I'm sorry.
like to ask the person testify. Do you think it's because there's no barrier between the road and the apartment complex that people choose to park on the street?
I think it's convenient this was up until a year ago. I think that family moved out. But at any given lunch hour, when Chugach came out, there was 3 cars parked along there, and I think those guys were perhaps doing things guys shouldn't be doing at lunch. And that has since gone away. So in the last 4 months, no, we haven't had a problem. Maybe it was 6 months.
How long have you been?
Since May of 2008, we've had this business. And
have you had pretty consistent problems with the parking along the street?
I'd have to say yes. It was worse during that one period where that family lived in that particular building. So my concern comes back to is we don't know who's going to move in next. And so today, if you were to say to me today, I could say in the last 2 months, no, I haven't had an issue. But I can usually tell when it's the end of the month because it's convenient for people to unload their goods or their household goods from the back porch of the building that goes along that back edge. So I don't know if closing it off, making it more, I don't know. I just don't know. Because I don't know if it's because of no parking.
Okay.
I trust what he said is true and correct as the number of buildings, number of people. I'm just telling you what I see from my side of the fence, and I don't have a solution, so it's hard for me to complain.
Right. And is it the parking problems, have they been year-round, like when the snow is piled high? Is that a problem then?
It's year-round, and when they plow that street, they plow it back the bike path, and then depending on who's plowing is whether or not it's street maintenance or sidewalk maintenance, because the sidewalk's painted on top of the street. We used to be a two-way street. Now it's a one-way because it isn't wide enough for 2 lanes. And then they put in the bike path and put it back in again, and it's really a mess. And so, yeah, it's there all the time. And when there is snow, though, and the car parks there, people can't come around the corner. I've had times to where semis can't get through after they unload at Pizza Man. They can't even get through. They have to wait for the car to move, and it blocks traffic. And then...
Right.
So how often does it have to happen for it to be a problem? Well, to me, once. When somebody can't get through, it's an issue. But I can honestly say in the last 4 to 6 months, we haven't had an issue. It was really just when that one particular family was there, it was the same people all the time. But we also get people, it seems like they might have visitors and a gathering or a group of people maybe coming, and you see 3 or 4 people parking on the weekends, usually on a Sunday. They'll park in the Quick Lube parking lot, and everybody cuts through that little path. So there's one lady in particular that uses it every day to walk to work. So I don't want to take that away from her. It's a great little thoroughfare, but yet it's misused by some, and that's where.
Okay. All right.
So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Denny.
You stated that there are no parking signs posted. Is that enforced, or who would enforce that out there?
I'm going to sound very...
The first few cars got towed away because they're in the way.
Do you know how many times I've called the police to just enforce the one-way? I almost got hit just coming today, and I wish I could... I don't know who to talk to, because the one-way street is not enforced. I have the police parking in the no park. I got pictures of the cops parking in the no parking zone by Pizza Man.
Yeah, that's what I would.
So to
maybe
your
having it
question,
enforced, but it doesn't sound like it's working.
No, and when they enforce it, it's more of don't park here. And then I have people calling my business saying, "Who are you to make it a one-way street?" And I'm going, because the street goes over my property, so they had to put it in one way to at least get it to where it didn't keep coming in. So, no, it's not enforced. And if it is, there's no teeth in it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Eben?
But again, my goal, if I can really clarify it, is not to say we need more parking, because I don't think, listening to Mr. Cook speak, I'm not saying that that's going to be the solution. It's just I wanted you to know, though, as you made your decision as to what's going on that side. So, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Eben.
Thank you.
I would have a couple comments, not knowing how this board will act on the variance. Some suggestions for you would be to communicate with the traffic department. It appears, looking at some of the figures that are here, and I think you touched on it as well, there's insufficient right-of-way for Brooks Road. It's shown only 30 feet of right-of-way, where a typical road right-of-way is 60 feet. So,
right. I've been in touch with Val, the department at the state level. I've been in touch with the community council. I've been in touch with everybody involved with this process, and everybody tells me to wait until they redo the intersection. I'm on many people's bad list, if that can be possible. But nothing happens. We're still waiting for funding for the study. Where I guess I'm a little frustrated is nobody asked me what's going on over there. The traffic department that said they did the study, is there a parking problem? Nobody asked me. And that's why I'm here, is because we look at it and we say nothing's happening in this area, but nobody's talking about what's happening around it unless we come. And the Quick Lube guy, I've never met him, but I know he's not going to be here because he doesn't see that in his parking lot during the week or on weekends. But I'm there all day because we live there. And that's where I just wanted you guys to know what's happening, that it's just not a vacant, quiet area. What is happening there is affecting us, but I don't know if parking's the problem. I just, wanted to have that you were aware.
thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one,
Am I allowed to make any more comments regarding?
you will have, yes, Mr. Cook, you will have rebuttal time. Seeing and hearing no one, the public testimony is closed. After Mr. McLaughlin's done taking notes, we'll ask if he has any rebuttal.
I have no other comments.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Cook, you have 4 minutes of rebuttal time remaining if you'd like to address any of the comments.
Thank you. I thought I was done. Page 5 that shows the survey. Brooks Road, the eastern portion of Brooks Road is all on my property. I have an easement. The city has an easement on my property for the bicycle path that goes from the southeast corner up to Centerfield Drive. They also have an easement on several hundred feet of Brooks Road on the south side of the site, including a small island that exists maybe 100 feet. It's indicated in the shaded area. There's a small island. Nevertheless, Building D, if you can see it there, it's in the center of the plat. Building D and Building C both, there's quite a grade probably about a 6 to 8 foot grade, and it's heavily treed from Brooks Road down to the rear of the apartment building, so nobody can walk down there. It's too steep. Nobody can walk down there. I've had to brush that out several summers, and it's just very, very difficult to get access there. So anybody that is trying to access, I don't know why anybody would be parking there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Brooks Road was made one lane not very long ago. I don't think anybody that would park on Brooks Road or at the Quick Lube lot across the street, I have no idea why anybody would be parking there to access my property, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Brooks Road is a very small road, especially, by small I mean narrow, especially with the bicycle path. The bicycle path is about 8 feet wide, and I have no idea why anybody would. Now, it's also that site, that per the landscape requirement, my site is fenced all the way to the Glen Highway, and there is a small footpath down into the property between buildings D and E, and we really can't control who is using that footpath. The building to the north of me is an Alaska housing complex. It's got its own little set of issues with tenants, and I've never heard of any issues from the speaker. If he had a difficulty or an issue, he certainly could have come and talked to me or to my manager, who's there, who lives on site. So I open that up to him. That's really all I had to say.
Does staff have any questions, Mr. Cook?
No, I do not.
The board members have any additional questions? Mr. Cook, a follow-up. You had mentioned a fence around the perimeter of your property. Is there a fence south of buildings D and C?
No, it's there. There's a very steep embankment there that's heavily wooded and has about a 6 to 8 foot drop. It's a very, very difficult. It's almost impossible to get from Brooks Road down to the rear of building C or building D due to the vegetation and the steep drop off down to the grade that building C and D sit at. So the fence runs from basically the Glen Highway. I really couldn't tell you how far over, but it's only got about a 5 foot, maybe 4 foot walking path from Brooks Road to the left end, to the west side of building D, and walks directly up to our parking lot. There's a small, it's not a gate, it's just the end of the fence, which, well, you can see it, it's marked there by the X's. That's where the fence is on the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion with respect to this case, please? Mr. Dunham.
I need a second here. Should I go ahead and read the variance motion? Okay.
Yes, please.
I'm just curious. Mr. Chairman, in the case of 2012-119, I move that a variance be granted from AMC 2145-080B2 off-street parking requirements for multifamily dwellings to allow 106 parking spaces, which is a 25-space reduction. Subject to the conditions listed by staff on page 4.
Those would be conditions 1 and 2.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Ms. Denny, you've indicated you would second that motion?
Yes, I have.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Mr. Dunham, would you care to speak to your motion, please?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I intend to support the motion. I concur with staff's findings on this particular request. And it sounds to me like the parking issue that we're talking about on the street may be partially generated by the subject property people that are living there, but it sounds like it's a convenience thing more than anything else. It doesn't sound like they're not using or they're incapable of using the required parking on site. So I don't see this as an issue where they just don't have parking available on site and they're using the road. It sounds like other people are using this thing as well, and Brooks Road, and it seems to me that it's more of a traffic enforcement issue than a real issue about whether or not the petitioner has enough parking on his property. So I intend to support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Ms. Denny?
Yes, I am also in favor of granting the variance for Mr. Cook. I agree with staff on standards 1 and 2 being met, and I also agree with Mr. Dunham then that the issues in the neighborhood don't appear to be being caused by a lack of parking on the site, that maybe some other avenues may need to be pursued to alleviate the one-way travel and the overflow parking happening. So I do intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Are there other comments from board members? Ms. Williams?
Yes, thank you. I also intend to support the motion for the reasons described by Mr. Dunham and Ms. Denny. But I wonder if there is appropriate contact information at traffic that we could provide Mr. Eben so that he has someone he can talk to raise his concerns, which seem very legitimate.
Yes, Ms. Williams, perhaps after we act on this case, our agenda is fairly light, that we could have staff get in contact with Mr. Evans. Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do intend to support the motion for reasons stated by board members Dunham and Denny as well. Just quickly like to thank Mr. Eben for coming down and testifying as a member of the public. It can be a challenging thing to do, but I appreciate the perspective that you gave to the board tonight, and thank you for being here.
Are there other comments from any of the board members? If not, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 7-0. I do need to read for the record, every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. That is our first, last, and only case this evening. So with that, that brings us on to reports. My only comment is, Ms. Williams, we saw that I believe next month is your last meeting, and you're on to Washington, D.C., is that correct?
Yep. Next month will be my last meeting.
Okay. Well, we'll save all the tears for next month then. Yeah. And the thanks and all that goes along with it. Although if anyone wants to thank her now, you can thank her now and next month as well.
You can thank me twice.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other comments from any of the board members? Mr. McLaughlin, we have before us the memo that, is there anything you would like to speak to with respect to the memo regarding parking variances?
Yeah, I mean, just generally, thank you. I did some research, went through all the legal opinions that we had on variances, and found a legal opinion that seemed ironclad about what you could and could not do with a variance. It didn't address parking variances. It just talked about variances in general. So I drafted this brief response that was going to bring total clarity to the board about what they could and couldn't do. And then my supervisor, Erica McConnell, looked at it. She agreed with it, and she hung on to it for an extra day. And then she said, well, she'd come up with a really sort of novel thing. A parking variance is often conditioned on the type of use, affordable housing or whatever. And that's something that wasn't addressed in the legal opinion. It was strictly about variances general. And so I drafted a legal request and provided it to my supervisor, and she'll be submitting it to the law office, and it might take a month to get a turnaround. And we want to have some urgency with it because we've seen a lot of parking variances, and many have been approved, and it's a very serious, thing, and so we're trying to be responsive to the board.
Thank you. Are there any questions? We will obviously be waiting with much interest. Any questions, comments of any of the board members? And how does next month's caseload look?
There are no cases on the agenda for next month, only a resolution, this one that was approved tonight. And so there will be no meeting next month, November.
Well, that totally changes things then. And Ms. Williams, if you won't be here next month, thank you very much for serving on the board and for all your hard work. And you will be sorely missed.
Thanks to you all, too. It's been a really great experience. And I'm sorry I'm leaving you. I didn't expect to have to go this soon, so.
Well, thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned. Oh.
I just had a quick question.
Michael.
It's December.
Okay.
Whether anybody knows this.
Oh, does anyone know if they will be around in December? The December meeting is the 13th. Does anybody know what they're doing next
Mr.
week?
Chairman, I will probably not be here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dunham.
There's a possibility I may not be.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. We will stay abreast of, I guess, what our workload and I suppose we'll be putting a request in. I think we were a fully constituted board for what, maybe 6 months max. So now we're in search again. We're adjourned. Thank you.